With the first Spanish ships to reach the New World came a black man. He was Pedro Alonso Niño, one of Christopher Columbus's pilots.
Blacks were common in Spain and Portugal in the 15th and 16th centuries. Some entered Spain earlier during the centuries of Muslim rule there. Some crossed the Mediterranean from Africa as seamen. Others were brought across as slaves.
In 1513, 21 years after Columbus's first crossing, 30 blacks helped Balboa chop through Central American jungles to discover the Pacific Ocean. That same year, black men accompanied Ponce de Leon through Florida while he was searching for the Fountain of Youth.
Others helped explore Guatemala and conquer Chile, Peru, Venezuela, and Mexico. They accompanied men like Cortez, Narvaez, Cabaza de Vaca, Coronado, and De Soto.
Black men came with Menendez in 1565 when he founded the city of St. Augustine in Florida. One of the most remarkable black explorers was known as Esteban. The black-bearded Esteban was part of an expedition of 600 men on 5 ships that sailed from Spain in 1527. After the grueling voyage across the Atlantic, dozens of deserters abandoned ship when it stopped on the island of Santo Domingo.
As the ships sailed up the Florida coast, a storm came up, and the ships were battered to driftwood against the reefs. Only 4 men managed to swim ashore. 3 Spaniards and Esteban walked from Florida through what is now Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and New Mexico down into Mexico. He was the first foreigner to visit many of these areas. In 1535, he reached Mexico City, where the Spanish viceroy ruled.
Esteban lived quietly in Mexico City until 1539. And then Fray Marcos de Niza invited him to join a party seeking the legendary 7 cities of Cibola, cities of gold houses and jeweled streets. Because Esteban knew the land, the people, and their languages better than any man, Fray Marcos sent him on ahead with a group of Indian guides.
Estebanico, send me a message by Indian runner telling me what you have discovered during the day. If you find nothing, send me a small cross no larger than a man's hand made of twigs. Send a larger cross. And if you find the 7 cities, send me a very large cross.
Esteban set out across the desert and soon vanished in the haze. For days, the Indian runners brought back only tiny crosses. And then, one morning...
Fray Marcos, look what comes! 3 Indians carrying a cross as large as a man. Esteban has found the cities.
The Indians told Fray Marcos that Esteban had found houses, a whole city of houses, some as high as 4 stories. They weren't gold, but above many doorways was embedded turquoise and other stones. Marcos set out to catch up with Esteban, only to meet 3 more Indians from his party, frightened and exhausted.
Where is Estebanico?
He is dead. Everyone is dead. The black man went into the city and was captured. He was killed with arrows when he tried to escape. Only we escaped.
What had Esteban discovered? He had come into the land of the Zunis, in what is now the southeastern part of Arizona. Esteban, a black man, was the first man from the Old World to reach Arizona.
Esteban and Pedro Alonso Niño have long been considered the earliest blacks to reach the New World. Today, however, some historians believe that Africans were here before 1492, before Columbus. Who they were and how they got here is uncertain, but researchers are continuing to look for clues. The first white man to come to Chicago was black. He was Jean-Baptiste Pont de Sable, born in Haiti about 1745. The son of a Frenchman and a former slave, Sable was taken to France for his education and came to New Orleans in 1765.
At that time, New Orleans was a city where blacks were suspected to be runaway slaves. Sable took refuge with a group of Jesuit monks until he decided to travel inland to trade with the Indians. He and two companions, eventually reaching St. Louis.
For a time, Sable lived with the Illinois Indians. When he was 25, he married a Potawatomi Indian girl, and he settled near Fort Peoria.
But young Sable did not stay settled. He traveled through the wilderness, trapping. Eventually, he reached Lake Michigan. He found the narrow stretch of land where travelers carried their small boats between the Illinois River and Lake Michigan on their way to and from Canada.
The Indians called the area Chicago, or simply Chicago. In 1772, Sable built a trading post in a 5-room house. This was the beginning of the first settlement in what is now the city of Chicago.
Hey!
British redcoats had arrived in Boston in 1765, sent by the Crown. The British expected the colonies to help share the expense of maintaining the troops. And as year followed year, resentment grew. Arguments and fights between townspeople and soldiers became common.
On the night of March 5th, 1770, the fire bell on the Boston Meeting House rang out. Crowds formed, and the redcoats tried to disperse them with bayonets and rifle butts. The crowds threw stones, sticks, and chunks of ice. On King Street, a group of British privates met a crowd that was led by a tall black man, Crispus Attucks.
Attucks had been a slave. He ran away from his master 20 years earlier and worked as a seaman. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall, a commanding figure. On seeing the British troops, Attucks shouted,
Do not be afraid! They dare not fire!
As the angry crowd surged forward, Private Hugh Montgomery raised his musket and
Crispus Attucks fell dead, a martyr for American independence. The crowd turned and ran, but not before 5 men lay dying in the street. The tragedy was called the Boston Massacre. It moved the American colonies and the British Empire closer to war.
The tradition of black support for the United States is rich and deep. Black fighters stood at Lexington and at Concord Bridge. Lemuel Haynes was there. Samuel Kraft was there. Peter Salem, Pomp Blackman, Joe Putima, and Isaiah Bajona.
Lemuel Haynes fought at Ticonderoga, so did Primus Black and Ephraim Blackman.
Prince Hall fought at Bunker Hill with Pomp Fisk and Cuffe Hayes and Caesar Dickerson and Caesar Weatherby and Salem Poor and Peter Salem.
Peter Salem was a hero that day, June 17th, 1775.
2,000 British infantry were ordered to smash the American militia around Boston. All morning, the ships bombarded the fortifications, and around 1 o'clock, the infantry landed and attacked. The colonials beat the redcoats back once, twice, but by the third assault, the Americans were almost out of powder. As the British stormed the hill, Major John Pitcairn urged his men on.
Pitcairn fell, shot by Peter Salem. The British line wavered and fell back as the men took their commander's body to the shore. The battle was over. George Washington took command of the American forces in July, after the Battle of Bunker Hill. Shortly after, he barred black enlistments in the Continental Army. But as the war dragged on, he needed more and more men.
After Valley Forge, every able-bodied man, black or white, slave or free, was welcome in the Army. Black slaves now joined and fought and sometimes died. Prince Whipple and Oliver Cromwell crossed the Delaware with Washington. Jordan Freeman killed a British commander in defense of Fort Griswold in Connecticut. Captain Mark Starlin, the only black naval captain in Virginia's history, made night raids on British ships in Hampton Roads.
Starlin returned home, a hero, after the war. But he fell victim to the slavery he had left to fight for his country. His old master reclaimed him, and Mark Starlin died a slave.
Black men often were used as spies during the Revolutionary War. Two of the most famous were Pompey and James Amistad. Pompey was a hero of Stony Point, a strategic fort on the Hudson River. Washington had ordered General Anthony Wayne to retake the fort.
Pompey, the slave of a patriotic farmer, was allowed into the fort to sell strawberries and cherries. Once a soldier asked,
"Why do you come only at night?"
It's the cornholing season. I can't come during the day.
"Then you might get yourself shot, mate. You should know the password,
The password?
so you can pass the sentry. When he says, 'Who goes?' you say, 'Going, Mill.' He'll let you through."
That was the mistake Pompey was waiting for. On the night of July 15th, 1779, General Wayne's men moved into place. Pompey and two other men disguised as farmers went ahead of the column.
Up! Who goes?
A cornmeal.
Oh, it's you, Pompey. Come ahead. Who's with you?
The friends, they bring the cherries.
Let me have some. I like...
With a sentry out of the way, Wayne's men were able to move up to the fort and take it quickly. With the help of men like Pompey, the Revolutionary War ended on September 3rd, 1783. 5,000 black Americans had fought alongside the white colonists on both land and sea. Hundreds of slave soldiers walked out of the army and into freedom.
but the spirit of the revolution dwindled. Thousands of black slaves wondered how soon they would share the freedom won from the British. They feared that the war had been fought for white men's freedom. Slavery grew stronger. Discrimination planted deep roots, and black Americans suffered.
God sure gonna make this trouble good. Stand still, Jordan, Jordan. Stand still, Jordan.
In 1812, war again broke out between the United States and Great Britain.
Black soldiers fought for Andrew Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans. In September 1814, less than 4 months before that famous battle, Jackson issued a proclamation asking for the support of free blacks in Louisiana.
To every noble-hearted, generous freeman of color volunteering to serve during the present contest with Great Britain, and no longer, there will be paid the same bounty in money and lands now received by the white soldiers of the United States.
400 blacks enlisted in Jackson's army. They joined the Navy, too. One estimate says that in the War of 1812, between 10 and 20% of the Navy was black. Captain Oliver H. Perry had high praise for black sailors.
In the thick of the battle, many of my black crew set good examples for the white seamen to follow. They seemed absolutely insensible to danger.
Nathaniel Shaler, commander of the ship Governor Tompkins, told his own stories of black courage.
My vessel endured a heavy siege by the enemy, and my black crew never once faltered in their duties. The name of John Johnson, one of my black seamen, should be registered in the Book of Fame. He lay mortally wounded by a 24-pound shot, crying out words of encouragement to his fellow crewmen. And John Davis, another Negro done in by a similar fashion, begged me to throw him overboard so that he'd be out of the way of the others.
The war ended in 1814. The British withdrew. New land was available in the West, but it took courage to venture into the new untamed territories.
Westward rolled the wagons. Westward went the pioneers, black and white. In the winter of 1843, George Bush, a black man, set out with his family and 7 white families over the old Oregon Trail to the Columbia River Valley.
Bush took along $2,000 in raw silver. With it, he bought the first saw and grist mill on Puget Sound on the West Coast, where his party finally settled after living over a year on the trail. They were the first Americans to settle on the Sound.
The frontier also beckoned to James P. Beckwourth, born in Missouri, the son of a white father and a black mother. When he was 27, he joined a fur trading expedition heading west. He shod horses, fought Indians, trapped beavers, skinned furs, hunted game for food.
In California, in the rugged mountains south of Mount Shasta, he discovered a pass that bears his name to this day.
Black explorers, frontiersmen, pioneers, revolutionists, Esteban, Bush, Sable, Beckwourth, Attucks, Peter Salem, and many others. They shared the American experience, from defending liberty to opening the frontier. They believed in the Declaration of Independence and hoped that its white promises would someday prove a reality for all men.
One morning soon, my Lord, one morning soon, I heard the angels singing. One morning soon, my Lord, one morning soon, I heard the angels singing. Mind not, my brother, how you walk on the cross. I heard the angels singing. Your foot might slip, your soul be lost. I heard the angels singing. One morning soon, my Lord, one morning soon, I heard the angels singing.
One morning in 1761, a rich Boston tailor, John Wheatley, took his wife, Susanna, down to the docks to inspect slaves.
But, my dear, our other slaves are growing old. What you need is a young one who, when trained properly, can be your maid.
Oh, that one there. Look at her, John. Why, she can't be more than 7 or 8 years old. Buy her for me, John. Take her out of this living hell.
So, the frail little African girl who spoke no English came to live with the Boston Wheatleys. The first thing Mrs. Wheatley taught her was her new name, Phyllis.
Mrs. Wheatley taught the little girl to read and write, and by the time Phyllis was 16, she was reading Horace and Virgil, 2 Latin poets, and Pope, the great English writer.
When she translated a poem from Latin, her Boston neighbors were amazed that a black person could be so smart. They had the poem published.
In 1775, when Phyllis was about 22 years old, she wrote a poem honoring General George Washington. It included these lines: "Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side. Thy every action let the goddess guide. A crown, a mansion, and a throne that shine, with gold unfading, Washington, be thine."
Phyllis sent the poem to him with a brief letter. Washington sent a letter thanking her and invited Phyllis to his Cambridge headquarters. In 1776, she did visit him.
Phyllis lived in a day when to be a free black was a privilege and a handicap. She was on her own to build a life in a society that did not welcome her. Her courage and resourcefulness speak highly not only of herself, but of thousands of other black pioneers whose struggles helped shape America.
Oh, Lord, I just come from the fountain, just from the fountain. Lord, I just come from the fountain. His name's so sweet. Oh, Lord, I just come
Literature was only one area in which blacks proved their capabilities. In the field of science, Benjamin Banneker showed his genius as a mathematician.
Benjamin Banneker, born free in 1731 in Ellicott's Mill, Maryland. While still in his 20s, Benjamin carved from wood what was said to be the first clock built entirely in America. With borrowed books, Banneker taught himself mathematics and astronomy and was soon able to predict eclipses. He became fascinated by the heavens.
In 1791, Benjamin Banneker published an almanac with many tables of scientific and general information. He published the almanac every year from 1791 to 1802. He also published a lengthy study on bees and computed the life cycle of the 17-year locust. He never stopped observing. When he was 66, he wrote,
"Standing at my door, I heard the discharge of a gun, and in 4 or 5 seconds after the discharge, the small shot came rattling around me, 1 or 2 of which struck the house, which plainly demonstrates that the velocity of sound is greater than that of a cannon bullet."
This observation was valuable to the Army, for no one before Banneker had pointed out that there was time to take cover after hearing a cannon blast. His conclusions encouraged more scientists to further study the nature of sound.
Although Banneker was born free, he was sensitive to slavery. In 1791, he wrote a famous letter to Thomas Jefferson, challenging Jefferson's liberalism.
"I apprehend you will embrace every opportunity to eradicate that train of absurd and false ideas and opinions which so generally prevail with respect to us, and that your sentiments are concurrent with mine, which are, that one universal Father hath given being to us all, that he not only made us all of one flesh, but that he hath also without partiality afforded us all with these same faculties, and that however diversified in situation or color, we are all the same family, and stand in the same relations to him."
I stood on the river of Jordan to see them ships come sailing over.
Benjamin Banneker lived and died long before his fellow blacks were freed from slavery. But he broke the chains that had bound him to poverty in his early years. Through years of hard work and self-discipline, Benjamin Banneker made important contributions to science and to humanity.
Yet whites continued to be amazed at black accomplishments. One day, in 1795, the good citizens of Vienna, Maryland, a sleepy village on the Nanticoke River, saw a ship approaching the dock.
"Jonathan, look there, that ship." "What about it?" "There at the helm. It's a nigger and a nigger crew."
Why, there's not a white man aboard. Ring the alarm.
Ahoy! You at the helm! Where's your captain?
I'm the captain.
"You a black man?"
Who's your owner?
I have no owner. I'm free. This is my ship and my crew.
"You'd better not try to land till you can prove who you are."
This is the Ranger out of Westport, Connecticut. We are here to buy corn.
Do you have identification papers? Let us see them.
Very well, then. Send out a boat.
Black Captain Paul Cuffe proved that he owned the Ranger and was its captain. Cuffe made a fine profit on the corn he bought in Maryland and sold in Connecticut. But the experience of seeing hundreds of blacks in chains affected him deeply. The local townspeople even prevented Cuffe's free black crew from talking to their slaves.
Paul Cuffe was born in 1759 on an island off the Massachusetts coast. He never lived far from the ocean. By the time he was 35, he owned his own fleet of whaling ships.
Successful though he was, Cuffe was disturbed by how blacks were treated. He concluded that black men could be free only in Africa. So, late in 1810, he set sail for the British colony of Sierra Leone in Africa. He arrived on New Year's Day, 1811. With English cooperation, he founded the Friendly Society of Sierra Leone. He planned to transport American blacks to Africa each year, but the War of 1812 stopped him.
At the war's end, he carried 9 black families, 38 people to Africa, paying the $4,000 expense out of his own pocket. He planned more trips, but other blacks attacked his plans. At a meeting in Philadelphia, a speaker asked,
"Why should we leave this land so dearly bought by the blood, groans, and tears of our fathers? This is our home."
Cuffe answered,
"Africa has much to offer the world, if only the world would look and listen. I bring part of Africa with me, in the goods I take to Europe and America. If black people are pressed into servitude here, let them return home with me. Some have already gone. I furnish them with provisions without fee or reward. My hope is in a coming day, a day when black people will enjoy equality and freedom. If not here, then in Africa."
Paul Cuffe died 2 years later. Over his grave behind the Westport Meeting House is a monument. The inscription reads,
"In memory of Captain Paul Cuffe, a self-made man, patriot, navigator, educator, philanthropist, friend, a noble character."
Some black men turned to religion for comfort. Richard Allen was one such man. Born a slave, he purchased his freedom in 1777. That same year, he became a Methodist, a religion growing in popularity among blacks, both slave and free.
In 1786, Allen moved from Delaware to Philadelphia. He started prayer meetings for his own people, but when he proposed separate black religious organizations, he was opposed by both blacks and whites.
Free blacks were afraid that separate black organizations would discourage the anti-slavery sentiment that was building near the turn of the century. They didn't want to make whites suspicious.
Whites in the North were not ready to allow blacks to organize separate groups. They tried to discourage Richard Allen from his plans.
Allen was allowed to bring blacks into St. George's Church, once an all-white church. But as the number of blacks increased, so did the insults. Allen himself was pulled from his knees in the middle of prayer and forced to move to the balcony of the church. Separation from the church seemed inevitable.
When the split finally did come in 1794, it led to 2 new organizations. The first, headed by Allen, was a Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church. The other, headed by Allen's friend Absalom Jones, was a St. Thomas Protestant Episcopal Church. In 1799, Allen was ordained a deacon. He unified thousands of blacks at a time when unity was so important. Under the spreading influence of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, slaves and free blacks alike found a common cause that helped them to bear the hardships of slavery and racism.
Have you got good religion? Certainly, Lord. Have you got good religion? Certainly, Lord. Have you got good religion? Certainly, Lord. Certainly, certainly, certainly.
Other blacks carried on the tradition of scientific research handed down by Benjamin Banneker. Norbert Rillieux was born a slave in Louisiana in 1806 and educated in France. When he returned to New Orleans, he became interested in sugar refining, and in 1846, he invented a refining process that revolutionized the sugar industry. His process made sugar cheaper to produce. It changed the color from dark to light, and it made millions for the sugar industry. Dr. Charles Brown, a sugar chemist with the United States Department of Agriculture, said of Rillieux's discovery,
Rillieux's invention is the greatest in the history of American chemical engineering, and I know of no other invention that has brought so great a saving to all branches of chemical engineering.
And there were those black Americans who spoke out against slavery.
Gabriel Prosser wanted to be free. With the help of his brother, his wife, and another slave, he enlisted several thousand slaves in a plan to capture Richmond, Virginia. 3 columns would attack the city. The right wing would capture the arsenal, the left wing the powerhouse. The center was to encircle the city and kill every white person except Frenchmen, Methodists, and Quakers.
After Richmond, the slaves would seize Virginia's other cities and name Prosser King of Virginia. The night of the attack, August 30th, 1800, a terrible thunderstorm washed away bridges and flooded roads. Gabriel postponed the invasion, a delay that was fatal.
2 slaves had informed their masters of the plot. Governor James Monroe declared martial law. The militia rounded up the ringleaders. At their trial, one of the plotters said,
"I have nothing more to offer than what General Washington would have had to offer had he been taken by the British and put to trial by them. I have adventured my life in endeavoring to obtain the liberty of my countrymen, and am a willing sacrifice to their cause, and I beg, as a favor, that I may be immediately led to execution. I know that you have predetermined to shed my blood. Then why all this mockery of a trial?"
Gabriel Prosser and 34 others were convicted and hanged. But the hangings did not stop other blacks with revolt on their minds. They could kill Gabriel Prosser, but they couldn't kill the slaves' hunger to be free. David Walker, born in North Carolina of a slave father and a free mother, was a free man. By 1827, he could no longer stand living in the midst of North Carolina slavery.
In 1830, he published Walker's Appeal, one of the great abolition pamphlets in which he told his slave readers, "It's no more harm for you to kill the man who is trying to kill you than it is for you to take a drink of water."
Walker's book so frightened Southerners that they ordered the death penalty to anyone circulating the book. A group of Georgia citizens offered $10,000 for Walker's capture. More than one slave uprising was inspired by David Walker's fiery attack against slavery.
The slaves would be free. Hundreds, thousands, 100,000 followed the drinking gourd, the Big Dipper, to freedom. William and Ellen Craft were among them. Ellen was light enough to pass for white, and she did, acting as if her husband were a servant until they were safely north.
William Box Brown had himself nailed into a crate and shipped from Richmond to Philadelphia.
And there was Harriet Tubman.
One morning soon, my Lord, one morning soon, I heard the angels singing.
Harriet Tubman was born in 1823 on a slave-breeding plantation in Maryland. She married a free black, John Tubman, in 1844. But she remained a slave. When her master died in 1849, rumors spread that all slaves were to be sold down the river. Harriet had never learned to read or write, had never seen a map, and had no idea where north was, but she resolved to escape. She urged her husband to come with her, but he refused. She asked her brothers and sisters to come, but only 2 agreed, and at the last moment, they turned back. So Harriet set out alone.
She followed the North Star. When she reached the Choptank River, she walked for miles in the water, knowing that the bloodhounds couldn't trail her. She felt trees for moss that grew on the north side. On cloudy nights, she went from tree to tree. She hid in caves, in graveyards, and in the barns and stables of friendly Quakers. Finally, she reached Philadelphia and found work. She said,
I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person now that I was free. There was such a glory over everything. The sun come like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it
But it was not enough for Harriet Tubman to be in the North. Almost immediately, she made plans to return south to lead others to freedom. In the years between 1850 and 1860, she returned to the South 19 times. Each time she returned north with a band of fugitives. With her help, more than 300 slaves found freedom in Ohio, New England, and Canada. She was so successful that at one time the South offered $40,000 reward for her capture. The slaves called her Moses.
Neither Moses nor any of her groups were ever captured. As she said,
I never run my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger.
Come and go with me to my father's house, to my father's house, to my father's house. Come and go with me to my father's house. There is peace, peace, peace.
Hundreds of free blacks contributed to their people and their country. But so did the 4 million slaves who spent most of their lives on southern plantations.
these 4 million people were not free to seek out an education. Hardly any could read or write.
But, as a group, their contribution to America towers high above individual achievement, and their contribution is so obvious that a lot of people pass it right by.
America's slaves built an economy in the South that made Southern agriculture thrive for 200 years. By 1860, almost 2 million Southern slaves were turning out more than 5 million bales of cotton a year.
But slaves were not only field hands in the Deep South, they were gold miners in North Carolina.
They mined iron in Kentucky and lead in Missouri.
In many places in the South, slaves were the only skilled laborers. They were barbers and blacksmiths and cabinet makers and shoemakers. They provided for the needs of large rural areas when white laborers were scarce or non-existent.
Slaves were the backbone of labor in the South. Free blacks were an important part of labor in the North. The black everyman, the black man not written up in history books, is as much a part of American history as Benjamin Banneker or Paul Cuffe or Phyllis Wheatley or Frederick Douglass.
Stories of black people like Harriet Tubman, Gabriel Prosser, and all the others are stories of people who knew the value of freedom. Freedom for themselves and freedom for all men. They are stories of people who believed they could find that precious freedom in the Revolutionary War to free America. How many slaves risked death to take their freedom in America? Although the black man was brought to America against his will, he chose to stay here. And he made great sacrifices for his own freedom and for the freedom of all other Americans.
My Lord Gideon is ready for that great day. Hey, my Lord Gideon is ready for that great and awful day. My Lord Gideon is ready for that great day. Now, who's gonna be able to stand? We gonna all shout freedom on that great day, Lord. We gonna all shout freedom on that great and awful day. We gonna all shout freedom on that great day. Who's going to be able to stand? My Lord Gideon is ready for that great day. My Lord Gideon is ready for that great and awful day. My Lord Gideon is ready for that great day. Who's going to be able to stand? Satan camps are burning on that great day. Satan camps are burning that great and awful day. Satan camps are burning on that great day. Who's going to be able to stand? My Lord Gideon is ready for that great day. My Lord Gideon is ready for that great and awful day. My Lord Gideon is ready for that great day. Who's going to be able to stand?